They buried this $11 mold fix in 1897 so you'd keep paying billions. You see that black spot creeping along your bathroom ceiling. You scrub it. It comes back. You blast it with bleach. It comes back harder. You buy a $300 dehumidifier, and every single spring that dark shadow returns to the same corner above the shower, like it owns the place. Now stay with me. A single strand of copper wire, thinner than a pencil, has been eliminating mold from homes for over a century, not slowing it down, not treating it seasonally, eliminating it permanently. No chemicals, no machines, no monthly filter swaps. The Amish in Holmes County, Ohio have been doing this since before your grandfather was born, and almost nobody outside their community knows why it works. The first time I walked into a 200-year-old farmhouse near Charm, I spent the whole afternoon hunting for mold, root cellar, bathroom. Behind the wood stove where moisture pools the worst, there wasn't a trace. What I'm going to show you today comes from a forgotten 1897 agricultural bulletin out of Pennsylvania. A technique so simple you can install it this weekend with materials that cost under $35 in a house you already own. If you've ever felt like the solution to your mold problem was being withheld from you, you were right. Hit that subscribe button before we go any further. You won't want to miss what's coming in this series. I used to think mold was just part of owning a house. The industry needed me to keep thinking that. 30 years. That's how long I made my regular payments to the hardware store. Every bottle of bleach, every gallon of mildew spray, every air purifier with its replaceable filter on a 3-month schedule. I was a loyal customer to an industry that had no interest in solving my problem, because, well, a solved problem doesn't generate a recurring invoice. Then I met a man named Eli Miller. Eli runs a dairy operation outside Millersburg, and honestly, his milk house is the cleanest structure I've ever walked into. No bleach smell, no chemical residue, raw cedar walls, a slate floor, and a single copper wire running along the baseboard, grounded into the earth outside. I asked him what it was. He smiled and said, "That's what keeps the black stuff out." I thought he was pulling my leg. So I drove home that night and started digging. Copper has been fighting microbes for 4,000 years, but one 1897 document changed everything I thought I knew. Copper's antimicrobial properties aren't new. The Egyptians used it to sterilize drinking water. That's documented and accepted. But the specific application Eli was using traces back to something I found archived at Penn State Extension, a bulletin from 1897 written by an agricultural chemist named Dr. William Freer. So Freer was studying why certain Pennsylvania Dutch barns never rotted while their neighbors' barns, collapsed within 20 years. What he found, well, universities quietly filed away and never republished. He actually documented that barns with copper grounding wires running through the sill plates had mold counts 94% lower than identical structures without them. 94%. He called the mechanism galvanic displacement. The copper, when properly grounded to damp earth, creates a microcurrent strong enough to disrupt fungal cell walls, but far too weak for any human or animal to feel. Mold spores land, mold spores die. That's the whole mechanism. The Amish didn't need Dr. Freer to tell them this. They'd been doing it for generations, passed down from German and Swiss stonemasons who brought the technique across the Atlantic in the early 1700s. But by 1952, when the modern building industry was writing the first standardized residential codes, copper grounding for mold prevention was specifically excluded from approved methods, not because it didn't work, because it worked too well and, honestly, too cheaply. A 20-foot length of bare copper wire costs about $11. A single installation lasts 100 years with zero maintenance. Compare that to the American mold remediation industry, which now pulls in over $4 billion annually. Somebody made sure that wire stayed out of the manual. Mold doesn't land randomly. It's pulled to your walls by an electrical condition most homeowners have never heard of. This is the part that took me the longest to understand. When I finally got it, I felt like I had been robbed for decades. Mold doesn't just float through the air looking for a random place to settle. It colonizes where there's a slight static charge differential on a damp surface. Your drywall, your wood framing, your bathroom grout, all of them hold a tiny positive charge when humidity rises above 50%. Mold spores are negatively charged. They get pulled to those surfaces like iron filings to a magnet. That's why the same corner always grows mold. That's why scrubbing never fixes it. You're cleaning the symptom while the cause sits right there, invisible in the wall. So a properly grounded copper wire, well, it actually drains that positive charge straight into the earth before spores ever even have a chance to settle. No landing pad, no colony. The wire doesn't kill mold that's already there. It simply prevents the electrical condition that allows mold to take hold in the first place. Once installed correctly, your house, in effect, becomes invisible to airborne spores. Now, Cornell ran a study on this back in 2011, though you really have to dig to find it. They tested grounded copper wire installations in 12 farmhouses across upstate New York, all built before 1920, all with long histories of chronic mold, and after 18 months, 11 of the 12 showed absolutely no detectable mold growth. The 12th had an active plumbing leak that, unfortunately, overwhelmed the system. The researchers quietly concluded that passive electrical grounding represents a significant and honestly underutilized remediation pathway. Then, well, the study was filed away. No press release, no follow-up funding. A one-time $11 fix doesn't create jobs, doesn't sell products, and doesn't generate a single recurring invoice for anyone. Okay, here is exactly how to install it this weekend. So no contractor, no permit, no wall demolition required. If you're thinking this only works during new construction, just stay right here, because this next section is specifically for people who already own a home. You do not need to open a single wall. You do not need an electrician. You do not need a permit for what I'm about to describe, because you are not modifying any electrical system. You're actually creating a passive ground, which is legally classified as decorative unless it's connected to your home's electrical panel, and we are not doing that. So just go to any hardware store and pick up a 25-foot roll of number 10 bare solid copper wire, which should be about $15, one copper grounding rod 4 feet long for about $12, and one brass split bolt connector, which is around $3. Your total investment is under $35. First, identify the wall in your house where mold just keeps coming back. Usually it's a bathroom, a basement corner, or maybe a north-facing exterior wall. Next, you run the copper wire along the baseboard of that wall. You can hide it behind the trim with a small chisel, or, honestly, just paint over it if you prefer. The wire needs to stretch from inside that room, out through the wall, and down to the grounding rod, which you'll drive 4 feet into the soil outside, as close to your foundation as you can manage. Secure the wire to the rod with the brass connector, and that's it. No power, no batteries, no switches. The earth provides the sink, the copper provides the path. Eli Miller's grandfather installed theirs way back in 1943, and, nobody has touched it since. 82 years of mold-free walls from a single strand of wire. The Amish call this setting the drain, and honestly, every home I visited in Holmes County had at least one in the basement and one in the bathroom. Now, here's something a lot of people don't realize. Old houses actually outperform new construction with this technique. And, well, the building industry really doesn't want you figuring that out. Here's a layer most folks miss, and it explains why this method works even better in older homes than in new ones. Houses built before 1980 were framed with old-growth lumber, slow-grown pine, oak, chestnut. We're talking wood with tight grain and high natural resin content. That wood holds a different electrical signature than modern kiln-dried fast-growth lumber. Dr. Freer noted this specifically in his 1897 bulletin. Old-growth framing acts as a natural amplifier for the copper grounding effect. The resins in aged wood conduct the microcurrent along the entire stud, turning each wall into an extended drainage field. Modern construction, with engineered lumber and synthetic sheathing, well, it actually blocks this effect, at least partially. That's why so many new homes have persistent mold, despite all their vapor barriers and mechanical ventilation systems. They're quite simply electrically dead. So, your old house, the one you've been fighting for decades, is actually the ideal candidate for this technique. Every supposed advantage the building industry tells you a new house has over yours. You might want to rethink that. Your old bones, your real wood, your imperfect walls, they're not the problem. They're actually the solution, just waiting to be activated. Now, there's a second piece to this that almost nobody knows. Not even most Amish families will talk about it openly. On page 43 of the Freer Bulletin, there's a small illustration most readers probably skipped past. It shows the copper ground wire, but wrapped around it at 12-inch intervals are small bundles of a specific material. Freer identified it as charred oak bark, loosely bound. He noted that installations using this addition showed near-total suppression of spore germination compared to copper alone. I had absolutely no idea what that meant until I asked an 89-year-old Amish bishop in Lancaster County about it. He laughed, then took me out to his woodshed and showed me a shelf of what looked like black, crumbly chunks. Oak bark, harvested in early spring when the sap is rising, then charred slowly over a low wood fire until it turns into something between charcoal and activated carbon. His family calls it Die-Schwarz coal, the black coal. 6 generations of making it. You wrap small fistfuls of this charred bark in cheesecloth and tie those bundles along your copper wire every 12 inches. The charred oak is intensely porous and becomes highly conductive in combination with the copper ground. Freer called it a biological scavenger field. Not only does the copper prevent the electrical conditions for mold, but the charred bark actively pulls airborne spores from within a 6-foot radius, drawing them out of the air and neutralizing them through the grounding path.